will be starting the session 2 for the resident free paper, and we will be having 12 speakers, and I request Rehma Shamse for her talk on impact of ptosis surgery in a child with monocular elevation deficiency.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Rehma Shanze, second year resident at Mughal Eye Hospital, and today I'll be presenting to go under the knife or not. A 7-year-old boy presented to us in the OPD on September 2023 with the complaints of drooping of his left upper eyelid and downward deviation of his left eye since birth. The parents had noticed the drooping and deviation shortly after his birth but did not get it checked immediately. He underwent his first eye examination at the age of 1 year, for which no records are available. But the parents informed us that they were advised to not undergo any treatment yet. At the age of 7, he presented to us with the same complaints. The parents were concerned about the cosmetic appearance and wanted a surgical correction. The drooping was not associated with any fatigability or variability throughout the day, nor did the parents notice any aggravating or relieving factors. Past history is insignificant, so we'll move on to the examination. The patient had stable vitals with a visual acuity of 6.6 in the right and counting fingers in the left. Examination of the right eye was unremarkable, but in the left eye there was drooping of the left upper eyelid and an absent lid crease as shown in the picture below. Remaining examination was unremarkable. Fundoscopy of the right eye was within normal limits, while in the left eye there was a tilted disc, a myopic crescent, and a tessellated fundus. Ptosis assessment was as shown in this table here, with the MRD1 being -1 mm in the left eye, levator function being 2 mm, and a poor Bell's phenomena as shown by the picture on the left side. The orthoptic assessment revealed left 30-degree hypotropia and left elevation deficit as shown in this picture here. We moved on to cycloplegic refraction, and after retinoscopy the final PCA was right plane 6.6 and left with correction counting fingers. Based on this, we made a differential diagnosis: left congenital ptosis with left monocular elevation deficiency, left pseudoptosis with left MED, left stimulation deprivation together with refractive amblyopia. We made a provisional diagnosis of left congenital ptosis with left MED, left stimulation deprivation together with refractive amblyopia. Our management began with amblyopia therapy. This was done by lifting the left eyelid by taping it, patching of the right eye, and spectacle prescription. We counseled the parents regarding the importance of regular follow-ups and adherence to the amblyopia therapy. We also planned a forced duction test under general anesthesia. Unfortunately, the subsequent follow-ups were not adhered to, and the patient presented to us 3 months later, this time with a complaint of pain and redness in his left eye for 1 week. During this time, the patient had undergone left nap procedure followed by left frontalis sling procedure. Pain was severe in intensity, gradual in onset, non-radiating, associated with photophobia and mucopurulent discharge. There was partial drooping of the left upper eyelid, diffuse conjunctival congestion, a marginal 2:2 corneal epithelial defect at 8 o'clock position. The corneal sensitivity was intact and the fluorescence staining was positive. The picture on the left was taken by the parents showing left post-operative nocturnal lag ophthalmos. We made a diagnosis of exposure keratopathy secondary to ptosis surgery in an eye with poor Bell's phenomena. Our management began with prescribing the patient topical fortified antibiotics and lubricant and taping of the left eye while the patient was asleep. The first follow-up was done 2 weeks later. We reassessed the corneal epithelial defect. There was marked improvement. The second follow-up was again after 2 weeks. There was further improvement, so we moved on to cycloplegic refraction and spectacle prescription. We plan to continue the amblyopia therapy and removal of the sling. An alternative to lifting the eyelid by taping it is by the use of the ptosis crutches. So the take-home message in this case is know the importance about counseling, thoroughly examine all your patient. Everybody knows how to operate. The key is to know when not to operate. And finally, amblyopia therapy in young children should not be ignored. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Okay, so as the name indicates, this is monocular elevation deficiency, which means your elevation is deficit. So the elevation deficiency can be because of two causes, a restrictive cause or a paralytic cause. And depending upon the cause, your surgical management would be changed. So we will do the forced duction test to know the etiology. So when we're doing the forced duction test, and if we have a positive result, as we know, the positive result indicates a restriction. So in this case, we will have a restriction of the inferior rectus. So we'll go for recession of the inferior rectus, right? So now when we have a paralytic cause, the force reduction test would be negative and the globe will move freely when we are doing the force reduction test, right? So now our surgical management is changed and we'll move on to a surgical procedure called NAP procedure, which the child had undergone in our case. So in this case, we have to strengthen the elevation. We will transpose the medial and the lateral rectus to the superior rectus.
Okay. In which cases will you not do surgery?
For ptosis surgery?
Yeah.
Okay, so the contraindications are a poor Bell's phenomena, reduced corneal sensitivity, or tear film instability, or reduced tear production.
Okay. And will the pupillary margin reflex also tell you that whether you need to operate early or not?
Yes, if it's covering the visual axis, then we'll go for it.
What complication will occur if the patient is not operated earlier?
So since this is a young child and we're not, and the MRD1 is -1, so it's basically covering the visual axis. So the child will go into stimulation deprivation amblyopia or refractive amblyopia as well in this case. And as we know that the sensitive period for which the visual acuity is regained in children is particularly 7 to 8 years. So we should not ignore this time period and we should do it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I call upon Dr. Muhammad Muslim for his talk on distribution of ocular biometry and intraocular lens power in patients undergoing cataract surgery in an eye camp in northern Pakistan.
Valleys whisper, rivers gleam. A land dead feels like a living dream. Peace and beauty walk hand in hand. Serenity woven through this land. This land is my homeland. Yes, this is where I am from. The beautiful Gilgit-Baltistan. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Muhammad Muslim, PGR Ophthalmology, Lahore General Hospital, presenting you my study on the title of Distribution of Ocular Biometry in patients undergoing cataract surgery in an eye camp in northern Pakistan. I declare no conflict of interest. So, studies have shown that variation in ocular biometry occurs with respect to gender, race, genetics, and environmental factors. Northern areas of our country are high altitude locations. The atmospheric conditions of these areas are hypobaric, more sunshine hours, and strong ultraviolet radiations leading to biological effect on human body. The most important among these is the cataract formation. As the normative data of this area is not available, I decided to do this study last summer. The purpose of my study was to study the ocular biometric data of patients undergoing cataract surgery in an eye camp held in northern areas of Pakistan, particularly Gilgit-Baltistan. Following equipments and instruments were used for my study. So, total of 110 patients were selected using non-probability consecutive sampling technique. Ocular biometry of permanent local residents with significant cataract was included, and incomplete biometric data, coexisting diseases such as corneal opacity, pterygium, and severe dry eye causing errors in biometry were excluded. So, complete history and examination with slit lamp examination and fundoscopy, and refractokeratometer was used for keratometry. Axial length was made with an A scan with ultrasound contact method, and intraocular lens power was calculated. Frequencies, percentages, and mean with standard deviations were used for quantitative data, and comparison was done by independent t-test. So a total of 110 patients were selected for biometry from 2,500 individuals visiting the camp. The mean axial length was 22.13 plus minus 1.25 standard deviation. Mean keratometric readings were K1 43.28 plus minus 1.83 diopters, while K2 was 44.26 plus minus 1.67 diopters. And the mean intraocular lens power was 24.78 plus minus 3.43 diopters. The mean keratometry readings were higher in males as compared to females, and there was no significant difference in axial length and IOL power between genders. Here is a table showing ocular biometric distribution with respect to age in years, axial length in millimeter, K1, K2, and IOL in diopters. A comparison is made between male and female using independent t-test. Here is the table. So there were certain limitations of my study, which were small. It was a small sample, including only the patients with cataract. Only 2 cities were studied, Further studies can be done, including general population of this area, and more peripheral areas should be studied. So I concluded my study with the fact that people in Gilgit-Baltistan requires high power intraocular lens to achieve emmetropia. Environmental factors such as prolonged exposure to ultraviolet radiations and dry atmosphere contribute to conditions like corneal opacity, pterygium, and dry eye. These conditions make it challenging to calculate ocular biometry accurately. So this study provides normative ocular biometric data of inhabitants living at high altitude in Gilgit-Baltistan. Most residents of this district requires high power intraocular lens to achieve emmetropia postoperatively. The axial length is shorter and the reflective power of cornea is higher to achieve emmetropia. Increase interpupillary and intercanthal distance and narrow palpebral aperture in vertical height, which is a nature's protective mechanism against direct and reflected sunlight from the snow. The references I used for my study.
Any questions for Dr. Butler? Okay, what are the why in your part of your the northern areas the intraocular lens power is more? What are the causes?
Sir,
And what is the number of the IOLs which we have to?
sir, the mean IOL number was 24.7. It was hypermetropic and small eyes. The eyeball size, mean eyeball size was small.
How much? What is the percentage?
Percentage of
The number of the IOLs amongst the cataract surgery you did, or what was done? What is the percentage of the maximum, the average number of IOL population? Was 24?
24.7. Almost 70% of the patients undergoing that surgery in that camp. It was 70% of patients.
So the people in northern areas, they require
High
higher.
power intraocular lens post-operative.
Okay. What could be the reason beside small eyes?
Overall physical features of high altitude people are short stature and small height. One of them.
Okay, thank you. जो क्वेश्चंस हैं एक आधा क्वेश्चन कोई ना कोई पूछ लिया करे क्योंकि क्वेश्चंस के 10 मार्क्स हैं अगर क्वेश्चन नहीं पूछेंगे प्रेजेंटर से तो वो 10 नंबर नहीं मिलेंगे इसलिए कोई ना कोई क्वेश्चन जरूर पूछें ओके ओके I call upon the other speaker Dr. Sajila Saman for her talk on effect of intravitreal ranibizumab on ROP in terms of reactivation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa tawakkal ala Allah wa kafa billahi wakilan. And rely upon Allah, and sufficient is Allah as the disposer of affairs. I am Dr. Sajila Saman, PGR Ophthalmology from Lahore General Hospital, Lahore, and the topic of my presentation is the effect of intravitreal ranibizumab in retinopathy of prematurity in terms of reactivation. I declare no conflict of interest regarding this topic. So what is retinopathy of prematurity? It is a vasoproliferative disorder of developing retina and is a significant cause of childhood blindness. Vascular endothelial growth factor plays an important role in the neovascular phase of retinopathy of prematurity. Therefore, the treatment with anti-VEGF is justified in selected cases. Here's an overview of the retinopathy of prematurity and its stages. I will not go into the details due to time constraints. Before the last year's sad incident of posterior intravitreal injection related to endophthalmitis throughout Punjab, we were using intravitreal bevacizumab in selected cases of retinopathy of prematurity. With ban on bevacizumab, ranibizumab injections were started. However, we observed a reactivation in the disease in many cases, which led to the start of this study. So the main objective of this study was to determine the effect of intravitreal ranibizumab in terms of reactivation in the patients of retinopathy of prematurity. What is the reactivation of retinopathy of prematurity? Reactivation is said to occur when the signs of disease worsen after an initial period of regression. This regression occurred due to either the intravitreal ranibizumab injection or due to spontaneous regression of the disease. The signs of reactivation include the appearance of new ridges, lines, tortuosity, dilatation of or extraretinal neovascularization. The study design was interventional case series, and consecutive infants were screened in ROP, and the sample size was 38 patients, and the study took place in Lahore General Hospital. The screening criteria that was used for the screening of retinopathy of prematurity was as proposed by PROPERA, the Pakistan Retinopathy of Prematurity Education and Research Alliance, which says that if a child is born before 27 weeks gestation, then his first screening should be done at 31 weeks postmenstrual age. And if the child is born at greater than 27 weeks gestation, then his first screening should be done at 4 weeks of chronological age. So the patients who were treatment naive and the patients with type 1 ROP and aggressive ROP were included in this criteria, and the patients with stage 4 or stage 5 disease were excluded from this research. So a total of 38 patients qualified in the inclusion criteria of treatment, out of which 28 patients had aggressive ROP and 10 patients had type 1 disease. These patients were diagnosed by binocular indirect ophthalmoscopy or RETCAM examination, and an informed consent was obtained from the parents of all infants before intravitreal ranibizumab injection. Under topical anesthesia, intravitreal ranibizumab was given in a dose of 0.25 milligram per 0.025 ml at a distance of 3 mm or 2.5 to 3 mm from the limbus. After the injection, antibiotic eye drops were given, and the treated eyes were followed up closely, weekly, or even more frequently in some cases. So the data extracted from the study was the gestational age of the infant at the time of birth, and the gestational age at first injection, then gestational age at rescue therapy, and the interval between these two therapies. The birth weight of the child was also included, and the stage or zone of the retinopathy of prematurity in these patients. The statistical analysis was applied to calculate the percentages and frequencies, mean and standard deviations, and the independent t-test was used for comparison between the two groups. So the results showed that a total of 28 patients who had aggressive retinopathy of prematurity, and they were born at 30 weeks, were given first injection of intravitreal ranibizumab at 35 weeks of gestation, and they required a rescue therapy which was given as the laser treatment at 39 weeks. So the interval between two therapies was 3 to 4 weeks. So the total all the patients of aggressive retinopathy of prematurity required a rescue therapy, while the 10 patients who had type 1 disease, they were given a rescue therapy after 4 weeks, and 60% of them required the rescue therapy. So in conclusion, we can say that although intravitreal ranibizumab injection is beneficial as an initial treatment for retinopathy of prematurity, a long-term follow-up of these patients is required because a reactivation of the disease can occur. So the role of anti-VEGF is still evolving. So what does this study add to the literature? It says that the reactivation rate after initial intravitreal ranibizumab therapy for type 1 ROP or aggressive ROP were assessed, and the need for rescue therapy is reported. What are the limitations of the study? It has a small sample size, and it was just a single center study, and no comparison with other treatment modalities was done. These are the references that were used for this research, and thank you. Any questions, please? Because the ranibizumab injection is very expensive, and the patients were not affording for the second injection. Even the first injection was given by funds and donations, so it was not useful to use the second injection as rescue therapy because the proper results were not accomplished after the first injection. So we used laser therapy as a rescue therapy.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Okay, what are the other types of anti-VEGFs available beside ranibizumab and bevacizumab and aflibercept? What is the recent one?
Sorry, sir.
What is the recent anti-VEGF nowadays available?
What is the?
Recent anti-VEGF which is available nowadays?
Newer one.
Newer one.
New one is एक और
Anyone?
आप Faris
Very.
Imam, yes sir.
By the name of Vabismo, that is
Babismo.
nowadays.
Babismo.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're
Now I call upon another speaker, Dr. Salman Nasir, for his talk on regenerative therapy in retinal dystrophies. Salman Nasir. उसे नीचे. Hmm.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Salman Nasir, a resident of ophthalmology from Jinnah Hospital, Lahore. And today I will be giving a talk on regenerative therapy in retinal dystrophies. Retinal dystrophies are a group of regenerative disorders of the retina with clinical and genetic heterogeneity. The main pathology lies at the RPE photoreceptor complex and the choriocapillaries. More than to date, 270 genes have been identified that have been associated with different phenotypes of retinal dystrophies. These could be rod-dominated, cone-dominated, and generalized forms. Among them, retinitis pigmentosa is the most common overall, and Stargardt disease is the most common macular dystrophy. The materials and methods included, we have a prospective interventional case series. The clinical diagnosis of RP was confirmed by ophthalmological tests, and a total of 200 patients were involved in this study. Their ages were between 18 to 50 years and included both males and females. The vision was between 6-18 to counting fingers, having various degree of visual field loss. Other comorbidities such as diabetes, glaucoma, and cataract were ruled out. The regenerative therapy has different modalities. We can obtain the cells from the embryonic stem cells, from the adult stem cells, and exosomes, which we call as growth factors. So as I discussed, the sources could be embryonic, which include the blastocyst, that are the true source of stem cells, umbilical cord, cord blood, and the exosomes from umbilical cord. The adult sources include the adipose tissue, bone marrow, peripheral blood, and the growth factors from the peripheral blood. There were three primary outcomes of our study. Those were visual acuity, macular thickness on OCT, and visual fields, limited mainly because of their cost and availability. So we noted an improvement of average 2 steps in visual acuity on the Snellen chart. In patient having very low vision, we noted an improvement from hand movement to counting fingers. Similarly, on OCT, we saw an average decrease in macular thickness of 40 to 50 microns. There was also a subjective improvement in visual field as well. Color vision, contrast sensitivity improvement were also noted. You can see on your screens the resolution of macular edema on OCT in patients before and after treatment. There is significant improvement in the macular edema, central macular edema, pre and post treatment. These are the OCTs which again show improvement in macular thickness pre and post treatment. These are the visual fields, and you can see there is a slight improvement pre and post treatment in visual fields as well. The regenerative or the stem cells can be given by different routes. Mainly these are the intravitreal, which is limited because of the increased rate of complications, includes RD. We can give stem cells by subretinal route, suprachoroidal route, subtenon, and topical as well. These are some of the studies which show the harmful effects of the intravitreal route that has been associated with numerous complications in the past. Similarly, this previous study which has been done shows that subtenon route is favorable, very favorable, and literally has no complications at all. I'll conclude my presentation with the remarks that regenerative therapy is a novel treatment for the treatment of retinal dystrophies. A large number of population is affected by these diseases throughout the world. Early studies have shown promising results in improving both the visual acuity and the visual fields. I would like to say that if we can offer the patient a chance of improvement, even that is only a little, that can help the patient becoming a meaningful member of the society. So the studies also show the effectiveness of suprachoroidal and subtenon route for stem cell administration that are very safe and have little rate of complications. Thanks a lot.
What is Lux Turner? What is Lux Turner? It is a regenerative therapy. Any audience में से बताया कोई? आरपी के लिए जो यूज होता है, subretinal injection you give. It is an gene therapy that is which is the latest, which is in the nowadays in your new Kansky edition में भी आया हुआ है वो. तो you must go through that कि ये जितने regenerative में है इसमें इसका काफ़ी रोल है. This is important question. ठीक. Any questions from? और कौन सा आपका क्या इसमें क्या यूज़ किया आपने?
So mainly इसमें ना हमने subtenon route के through stem cells derived from the patient's own plasma
ठीक.
that were given through the subtenon route almost 1 to 2 ml at 3 consecutive visits separated by 2 weeks.
Subtenon दिया.
Subtenon दिया था क्योंकि previous studies के according subtenon route की जो efficacy है वो बाकियों से comparable है and side effects बहुत कम है. So that's why we chose the subtenon route. तो सर उसमें फिर बाकी जो इम्प्रूवमेंट है जैसा कि मैंने प्रेजेंटेशन में दिखाया कि मैकुलर थिकनेस इम्प्रूव हुई उसमें जो विजुअल फील्ड्स हैं देयर वर आल्सो सब्जेक्टिव इम्प्रूवमेंट और ओसीटी पे जो है सॉरी विजुअल एक्टिव जो है स्नेलन स्टार उसकी भी इम्प्रूवमेंट हुई है.
तो कुछ आपने देखा इम्प्रूवमेंट या जस्ट way of improving this, but what were the results? Did you?
सर वी हैव ऑल द डाटा सेपरेट मतलब डाटा है पेशेंट्स का वो इस प्रेजेंटेशन में इंक्लूडेड नहीं है लेकिन उसमें बिल्कुल जैसे आप कह रहे हैं कि इम्प्रूवमेंट बिल्कुल देखने में आई है. मेनली 2 फैक्टर्स जो हैं विजुअल एक्टिव उसमें इम्प्रूवमेंट आई है ऑलमोस्ट 2 स्टेप्स की और मैकुलर थिकनेस जो है ओसीटी पे उसमें काफ़ी इम्प्रूवमेंट देखने में आई.
Any questions?
थैंक्स.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is Aqsa Baloch here? No. Najmul Saqib Malik for his talk on angioid streaks with CSCR in pseudoxanthoma elasticum, a case report.
I'm Dr. Najmul Saqib, PGR, Mayo Hospital, Lahore, and today I will be presenting a case report on angioid streaks with CSCR in pseudoxanthoma elasticum. The patient was a 35 years old female that presented to us in OPD with complaint of bright degrees of vision associated with the objects appearing distorted for the last 2 weeks. The decrease of vision was sudden in onset, paleness, non-progressive, and was more for the central vision. And she's also observing the objects appearing broken, distorted, more for near vision for the last 2 weeks. A past ocular history is unremarkable. In systemic history, she complains of yellowish colored lesions on the skin of the neck for the last 15 years and abdominal pigmentation for the last 3 years. Family history is she's the only daughter, no parents or sibling is affected. In examination, the visual acuity of the right eye was 660 with best corrected visual acuity of 618 partial with plus 1.5 diopters. There is a hypermetropic shift, whereas in the left eye, the vision is 69 partial with best corrected 66 partial with minus 0.5. The rest of the anterior segment examination is unremarkable. Both eyes show angioid streaks which are greater than 1 disc diameter. In the right eye, there is a macular serous elevation with a parafoveal subretinal hemorrhage, and both eyes show the PUD orange appearance of retinal pigment mottling. This is the furnace photo of the right eye showing serious macular elevation, the angioid streaks, and subretinal hemorrhage, whereas this is the picture of the left eye. On systemic evaluation, there are painless yellowish papules and plaques on the skin of the neck with skin wrinkling. There is reticular pigmentation of the abdominal skin and a melasma on the facial skin. The rest of the examination is unremarkable. You can see in the picture, these are the lesions on the neck, yellowish golden color lesions and plaques. And these are reticular pigmentation patches on the abdomen. Uh, Based on the above findings, we ended up on a differential diagnosis of pseudoxanthoma elasticum, idiopathic CSR, pathological myopia, Ehlers-Danlos, and Paget's disease. Now we will be moving on to the investigations. OCT of the right eye shows subretinal fluid, an optically empty space in the subretinal area with a large serous PED and distortion of the foveal contour. Left eye was markedly unremarkable with some intraretinal hemorrhages. The foveal thickness was normal. Histopathology of punch skin biopsy was done, which showed clumping of the elastin fibers in the middle and lower dermal layers, which were staining positive for calcium. There was bilateral nephrocalcinosis. X-ray KUB was normal. The cardiac workup was normal, and the patient had microcytic anemia. Serum calcium was normal. The ECG was normal. We came on to the diagnosis of pseudoxanthoma elasticum, and based on the diagnostic criteria, we had 2 or more definitive major criteria. In treatment, we have to do a dermatological treatment with surgical excision of the plaques, with autologous fat or collagen injections, with carbon dioxide laser excision. General surgery referral, the patient also had anal fissure or hemorrhoids, and ocular treatment. In ocular treatment, we will treat the CSR with spironolactone 25 mg BD, that is acetazolamide 250 mg BD, and amsulacrid to monitor the visual acuity. We will be following up the patient on serial OCTs. 3 weeks later, the subretinal fluid had dissolved, but the serous PED was still there. Further plan was regular follow-ups, counseling regarding prognosis, and serial OCT macula. The take-home message is that we should consider CSR as a possibility in patients with angioid streaks when there is no other cause, and should proceed with multidisciplinary approach. Thank you.
Okay, what are the causes of angioid streaks?
So the causes are pseudoxanthoma elasticum, Paget's disease, idiopathic causes, sickle cell disease, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. We have to rule these out. We also did the FA of our patient, and classically inglot pattern was there. There was no evidence of any CMV. So basically, it is a disorder of the choriocapillaris. Choriocapillaris becomes excessively leaky, and there is exudation and transitation into the subretinal space, and the RPE's pumping ability is also affected. That's why fluid remains accumulated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We move on to another speaker, Dr. Farha Zafar, for her talk on visual acuity threshold for cataract surgery at LGH Hospital.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Farah Zafar, third year postgraduate resident from Lahore General Hospital. My topic of presentation is visual acuity threshold for cataract surgery at Lahore General Hospital. I declare no conflict of interest. Cataract is one of the leading causes of preventable blindness. Cataract surgery rate of 3,000 is bare minimum required by the World Health Organization in order to completely eradicate cataract-related blindness. Affluent nations have lower threshold for cataract surgery, leading to greater cataract surgery rate than developing nations. In developing countries like Pakistan, patients present very late for visual advice. There is little local data available focusing on the visual threshold for cataract surgery. This study was conducted to determine the presenting visual acuity of patients who come for cataract surgery at a tertiary care hospital of Punjab. Our objective was to find out the threshold of visual acuity for cataract surgery at eye department of Lahore General Hospital. Descriptive observational study was used, which was conducted in Lahore General Hospital from February 1st, 2021 to 15 June 2024. Patients visiting the hospital for cataract surgery from the ages of 28 to 80 years were included, while any intraocular pathology that led to visual impairment other than cataract was excluded. Data collection was done by reviewing the patient's medical records who underwent cataract surgery, name, age, gender, socioeconomic status, complete history with best corrected visual acuity pre-operative, and status of the fellow eye was noted. Visual impairment was defined as mild, moderate, severe. Mild ranging from 6 by 9 to 6 by 18, moderate ranging from 6 by 24 to 6 by 36, and severe 6 by 60 and less. So the results came out of 1,949 patients with mean age of 54 years, 927 were males and 1,022 were females. 33% had no systemic diseases, 52% had both hypertension and diabetes, with 10% only diabetes and 5% only hypertensive. Distribution of patients was done according to the age in three groups, Group A, Group B, and Group C, with the major chunk of the patients in Group B, 40 to 60 years of age. Distribution of patients was done according to the severity of the visual impairment. 20 patients were in the mild category of the visual impairment, 930 were in the moderate category, and 999 were in the severe category. Limitation of the study was as followed. It was a single-centered study with convenient sampling resulting in chosen individuals not being representative in other significant ways. Research at a national level is needed. We recommend public awareness programs must be launched to prevent complications and quality of life of patients. National screening programs are needed with extra focus on the risk groups. These are the references for the study. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, first of all, first question was that why patients not included before 20 years of age and above 80 years of age?
So 20 to 40 years of age were included, but not less than 20 years.
Why? जबकि आप विजुअल एक्यूटी तो देख रहे हैं ना सब में, तो वही देखना है ना आपने, विजुअल एक्यूटी देखना है, एक्सेप्ट फॉर फर्स्ट 5 years तक ना करें जो बच्चा नहीं बता सकता, या 10 years चलो 7 8 उसके बाद, एंड व्हाट अबाउट 80 years के बाद क्या उसको क्यों नहीं आपने किया?
You excluded her from the study.
हाँ.
जी सर.
What was the reason?
So because cataract, normally cataract is a age-related disease. Normally occurs in when the age is more than 20 years, 30 years. In younger age it can be, but it can be due to any traumatic cause or any other not related to age cause. So that's why we excluded the 20 years, less than 20 years.
एज रिलेटेड
Patients.
कैटरेक्ट तो वैसे ही 50 प्लस होता है,
जी सर.
40, ये तो फिर डेवलपमेंटल कैटरेक्ट्स भी फिर आ रहे हैं ना, जो आ रहे हैं यंग एज में भी आ रहे हैं, नॉन ट्रोमेटिक उनको भी आप कर रहे हैं, तो विजन आपने फिर 20 की ली है आपने, तो फिर वो दैट इज वन. सेकंड, व्हाट इज द डेफिनेशन ऑफ विजुअल इम्पेयरमेंट एंड ब्लाइंडनेस, WHO क्लासिफिकेशन?
Sir, visual impairment.
इसमें यह है कि जब आप करते हैं ना कोई भी, तो उसको आप गाइडलाइंस लेते हैं जो कि WHO की गाइडलाइंस हैं या जो ऑथेंटिक है उसके अकॉर्डिंगली करते हैं. दैट इज़ आपने लिखा है माइल्ड, मॉडरेट एंड सवेयर विजुअल इम्पेयरमेंट. आपने माइल्ड को किया है 6/9 to 6/18, मॉडरेट को किया है 6/18 to 6/36, and less than 6/36 to NPL probably you say visual
Severe.
impairment. It is not like that. It is less than 6/60 to 3/60 is severe visual impairment, and blindness is less than 3/60 to NPL. That is so. एक तो इसका था थोड़ा इशू और दूसरा विजन का. बाकी any other questions or audience if they want to ask?
Make a comment.
Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to another speaker, Dr. Alina Anwar. Is she here? No. Dr. Wajiha Rafi, is she here? Dr. Usman Bhatti? No. Okay. Dr. Fizza Zahid, Hafza Fizza Zahid? No. Dr. Zishan Hamid? No. So, I call upon one of the speakers in the first session, and she's Dr. Laiba Asif, in place of Dr. Laiba Asif. Dr. Laiba Asif's husband, Dr. Abdullah, will be doing, due to medical reasons, she's not able to come, so Dr. Abdullah will be giving presentation. Okay. The topic will be the influence of surgeon hand dominance on surgically induced astigmatism in phaco-cataract surgery. Is it same? Okay.
Respected judges and dear audience, Assalamu alaikum. Today I am going to present the influence of surgeon hand dominance on surgically induced astigmatism in phacoemulsification surgery. So the objective of the study was to compare the influence of surgeon hand dominance on SIA in phacoemulsification surgery, and the surgeon did right eye of the patient with right hand and left eye was operated with the left hand or the non-dominant hand. The design of the study was, it was a longitudinal study design carried out from April 22 to April 2023. So SIA of 200 patients who underwent phaco by a single experienced surgeon with temporal clear corneal incision was calculated. 100 right eyes with phaco performed by right hand and 100 left eyes with phaco performed with the left hand. The surgeon performed the phaco holding the phaco handpiece in the right hand while he was performing the surgery on the right eye, while left dominant hand while operating for the left eye. And a 2.75 millimeter kill corneal incision was placed temporally in all the eyes. So these are the incision placements, as you can see, temporally in the right eye with the right hand and left eye with the left hand. These are some of the videos, and a beautiful incision temporally in the left eye, and then a temporal incision with a 2.75 millimeter keratome in the right eye. So the surgeon is performing phacoemulsification surgery in the left eye. In these cases, obviously in these oriental eyes, in these South Asian region, the patients have deep set eyes, so the temporal approach is relatively safe because the phaco handpiece smoothly goes in, and we can perform the surgery relatively more easily, especially in the while doing the left eye with the left hand. So the phacoemulsification of both the eye was completed successfully. Followed by irrigation aspiration and injection of viscoelastic into the anterior chamber, forming the anterior chamber, and then injecting the intraocular lens after loading it. There goes the intraocular lens into the right eye with the 4-loop haptic design. So moving on with our study, the K values were taken with the Noidec autoref 1 day before surgery and 6 weeks post-operatively. And SIA was calculated using the ASCRS SIA calculator. It's available on their websites. And the pre-op and 6 weeks post-op K values were entered into the spreadsheet provided by ASCRS. This is the ASCRS SIA calculator. These are some of our values which we entered. So the comparison of SIA between dominant and non-dominant hand phaco was calculated through SPSS software. These are the results. So there were 98 males and 102 females, and a total of 200 patients. And this is the age distribution. So this is the plot of the double angle plot for the surgically induced astigmatism using the ASCRS V100 tool. This is the Mann-Whitney U test comparing the SIA between the two eyes, and a p-value came to be 0.251. So to conclude, a non-significant difference was found in post-op outcomes with the right hand doing the right hand phaco with right hand and left eye with left hand. So why we use the non-dominant hand, as we have discussed some of the points earlier on, that surgeon might have to shift the position while doing the left eye with the right hand. So he will have to sit temporally, changing the direction of the microscope and go temporal. So if we keep on training our left hand in the start of our residency and training, then we can, we can become experts in doing the left hand surgery with the left hand and right hand surgery with the right hand. How to minimize the surgically induced astigmatism? It obviously depends upon the wound construction. And the steeper meridian incision and clear corneal incision was associated with significantly reduced keratometric astigmatism. For temporal versus superior, we have already discussed. And temporal is more better in the deep set eyes, and we won't have to change our position, and it's more easier to manipulate with the phaco probe. The take-home message is: train your non-dominant hand. If not able to reduce pre-existing errors, at least do not induce new ones. And know your SIA. Everyone can calculate. It's on their website. Thank you so much for your attention. Any questions?
Yeah.
I'm not the surgeon shown in the videos, but I also operate left eye with the left hand and right eye with the right hand. I'm currently training in LRBT Hospital Township, and I do phaco left eye with left hand and right eye with right hand. And also I'm no, I'm not the surgeon in these cases. He's Dr. Ziaul Mazhari. As I told, surgeries were done by expert surgeons. We are already trainees.
What about the missing of temporal incision? You have that it is advantages in deep set eye. Does it have any limitation also?
Yes, the limitation about temporal incision is there is an increased risk of endophthalmitis, because the tear lake is near to the temporal incision. So this is the limitation of a temporal incision, as sir is asking. But the surgery is more easier to perform if we go with the temporal incision. I have also observed this while doing phaco surgery at LRBT.
So, ease versus endophthalmitis, predisposing to endophthalmitis, what would be preferred?
Yes, sir.
Ease or the safety?
Yes, sir. Safety first. This is a good debate.
One comment is that we are doing surgeries. What I do, I give 2 temporal incisions and one in the center at 12 o'clock, and do it with left and right hand both as they do it. We can do surgeries with both hands. That is very nice. And one, I should train my residents, or the new residents should be trained by manually, so that they can use both the hands. उसका फ़ायदा ये है कि you can go from temporal approach, and that is normally it is against the rule astigmatism होता है. और जहाँ तक end off का ताल्लुक है, I don't think so that is much a problem if your sterilization is good enough. उसमें कोई issue नहीं होता, क्योंकि normally we are giving 2 or 3 incisions, and हम कई दफ़ा relaxing भी incision दे देते हैं, तो your sterilization is good, then it doesn't matter, end off नहीं होता.
Yes.
और दूसरा ये है कि इसमें this is very good technique which is being advocated and started from LRBT, and we at Mayo are also trying to do the same, that we are trying residents should be doing with both the hands, so that maneuverability easy हो. फेको ईजी है, हाई पावर्ड हाई वैक्यूम मशीन्स आ गई हैं, आपने उसमें डालना और चॉप करना कोई इतना मसला नहीं रहा आजकल, एज कम्पेयर टू द जो आप वो ग्रूव बनाते थे, चॉप एंड वो कॉन्कर वाला, डिवाइड एंड कॉन्कर, इसमें क्योंकि आपने पकड़ना है उसको और ऊपर उठाना है, चॉप करना है, चलो दैट्स इट। बट ऑलवेज बी श्योर दैट चैम्बर शुड बी डीप, एंडोथेलियम प्रोटेक्टेड होए, और आपका कोई बहुत ज़्यादा आप उसमें जो है आपका एसी जो है दैट shouldn't flutter. Your flow rate should be minimum. For the residents, I must say the flow rate should be less. The bottle height should not exceed 70 to 80 in the first step, and then you can gradually in the second step you may go to 90 के करीब चले जाएं, and then with a vacuum of 350, 400, 500, whatever it is suitable. But not for the beginners. They should be very cautious handling this, और आप सीख जाओगे सारे। But this is the way your supervisor teaches you, the way you are trained, that is important. और क्योंकि पढ़ना भी है, सर्जिकल स्किल सीखना भी बहुत important है। Okay, very good presentation, and impressed that LRBT is doing such a good work, and Mughal as well, I think.
Yes.
And we at Mayo are also doing, and this will be now the future trend of most of the ophthalmologists and institutions, that they will be training the residents by FECO by both hands. So उसमें कोई issue नहीं है. You just have to do it, and it is not a big deal for that. Inshallah, Allah have. Okay, very good.